Hey guys, and welcome to this CrewAI Flows crash course, where you're going to learn how to use CrewAI's most powerful new feature. With Flows, you can combine the power of code with the power of CrewAI to build powerful event-driven workflows that can automate anything. For example, you could build a flow that combines multiple crews together to go off and write a 20,000 word book, or you could build another flow that goes off and is continuously looping and checking your emails and auto-generating responses for you. Or you could even build another flow that takes in a single newsletter and then branches off and builds a new post for YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Really, at this point with flows, your imagination is really the only limiting factor. And in this tutorial, we're going to be walking through everything step by step together. We'll eventually cover 6 different examples when it comes to flows, where we're going to start off by creating a super simple flow just to get our bearings, and we're slowly going to add in complexity to our off creating a new flow that is combining multiple crews to go off and write that 20,000 word book on our behalf. And the best part, which I'm so excited for you guys to see, is creating flows is so easy. It doesn't matter if you're a beginner or an advanced developer, you can start creating your first flows today. So if you're excited to level up as an AI developer and you're tired of those other complicated AI frameworks, this is the video for you. But enough talking, let's go ahead, get our hands dirty, and dive into creating some flows. Oh, and I almost forgot the best part. All the source code in this video is completely for free, and you can download it by checking out the link down in the description below. And if you want some additional support and to meet some fellow AI nerds, go ahead and check out the free Skool Community I created for you guys. We have over 3,000 members and going strong, and we'd love for you to be a part of the group. But enough of all that, back to flows. All right, guys, so welcome to the first example where our whole goal is to build and run your first flow. Super excited for you guys. Here's a quick overview of everything that we're about to do together. First things first, we need to actually set up your environment to run these flows. This is gonna be super simple. I have some like step-by-step instructions for you guys to follow. Then we're gonna actually dive in to start stubbing out our flow and then running it. And along the way, we're going to cover a few important topics that you need to know when it comes to building flows, such as the flow class as a whole, and then what the heck are these start and listen decorators. We're going to see these in action and explain what's exactly going on, so you guys will actually click and understand a few of the key important parts of working with flows. So let's go ahead and start running into step number 1, which is setting up your environment to run these flows. All right, guys, so welcome to Cursor. This is where we're going to be coding out all of the different examples over here inside the tutorial. And what we need to do before actually creating that first flow is we need to set up your local environment. Now, here's what we need to do. Inside of the source code that you can download for this project, you will find a README. This README will walk you through the 2 steps that you need to do to set up your virtual environment on your computer. And the reason why we're trying to do this is we basically, when working with Python, want to create a virtual environment each time we work on a project. That way we don't have different packages mixing up and conflicting with each other. So what you'll see inside of this README is I give you guys the option to create environments in 2 different ways. You can use Conda if you've already installed Conda on your computer, or you can go down the path of creating a virtual environment this way. Now, I'm a huge fan of using Conda, so I'm just going to go with approach number 1. So let's walk through this together. So first things first, we're going to open up our editor, and we're going to go ahead and paste in this command to create our new virtual environment. This will take a second. I already have the virtual environment, so it's going to ask me, do I want to remove it? And I'll say yes, and it'll go through the process of going ahead, deleting it, and installing all the local packages. So I'm going to say yes, I do want to create this virtual environment. Then once it's done, it'll say, hey, cool, you have installed a new virtual environment for Python 3.10. Do you want to activate it and start using it? The answer is yes, and here's the command. We're just going to do conda activate CrewAI flows. This will go ahead and update our current virtual environment to say we are using CrewAI flows, and this is where we can now work safely and not mess up and interfere with other different Python versions on our computer. Cool. Now, what do we want to do next? Well, now that we have our virtual environment, we want to go off and install all the requirements for this project. So we can just follow this command right here once we're in our virtual environment. And what it's going to do is go off and install all the different dependencies in our requirements.txt. Where is this at? Well, it's right here, requirements.txt. If you open it up, you'll see that we're just using 2 right now. We might add more later, such as CrewAI and then python.env. This is how we're going to go off and actually like load our environment variables. More on that later on. So what we're going to do, go ahead and install it. And this is going to add in, sorry, wrong directory. You need to make sure that you're in the root CrewAI flows. But once you do that, you can go ahead and type in pip install -r requirements, and this will go off and install CrewAI and python.env. Awesome. So we have now successfully set up our environment and installed our dependencies. which means we can now start working on actually creating our first flow. So here is a super basic flow where we're going to strictly focus on the 3 core components we talked about earlier: flow, listen, and start. And we're going to see how they all tie together in just a basic flow outline, understand what they do, and then we'll actually start implementing in functionality so you can see it, everything in action. So first things first, whenever you want to create a flow, what you need to do is create a new class that inherits from flows. Okay, super straightforward. Now let's dive into our 2 different decorators, start and listen. So let's start with start. Start does exactly what you think it does. This is the starting function that gets kicked off whenever you start running a new flow. So in this example, whenever we kick off this example flow, the first thing we're going to do is call the generate city function. And in this example, we only have 1 start function, but you could easily have 5, 10, doesn't matter. You can have as many starting points inside of a flow as you like. Now, what we want to do next is dive into our listen decorator. And the way our listen decorator works is it does pretty much also what you would expect it to do. It is going to listen for whenever the generate city function finishes. And as soon as that function finishes, it's then going to go off and run this function. So this is super nice because we make it very easy to listen to whenever things get done so that you can start taking action on them. So let's walk through this flow start to finish so you can understand exactly what's happening. Whenever a user kicks off this flow, first things first, we are going to go generate a city. This city function is going to then use AI to go off and generate a random city. Then we are going to return that city. And what's so nice about this is inside of flows is whenever you return a value from one function, what you can do is access that return value elsewhere. So in our case, we're go ahead and generate a random city here. And then for all of our listeners, they're going to be able to access that generated random city. So you can see right here, and our listener, we're going to be able to access that return value right here. So super cool. And so basically what we're doing is go, okay, go ahead and generate me a random city, return it. And then all of our listeners will go, hey, I'm waiting for generate city to be done. So whenever this is finished, it goes, oh, okay, you're done. Oh, and I see you generated a random city for me, New York. Awesome. I'm now going to go off and use AI to generate a fun fact about this city. So all around, pretty straightforward, and as you can see, it makes it so nice to just pass information between different events inside of your flows. Okay, so cool. Now, just to wrap things up, we've talked about kicking off your flow, but how the heck do you actually do that? Well, super easy. Just like you normally do with crews, where you would go off and create a crew, and then you would run kickoff. That's exactly what you do with a flow. You create your new flow, and then you just run flow.kickoff. And what'll happen is the final function, whatever was the last running function inside of your flow, if this was to return something, so return fun fact about New York, this will get returned and this will actually become the result. So then we can actually go off and log the final result from our flows. So now that you've seen big picture and high level implementation of how things are structured in a flow, let's go ahead and actually go look at a real world example of this in action so you can see, oh, that is exactly how information is getting passed around. And we're going to start using and adding in some AI so you can actually see us generating random cities and generating fun facts. So let's go ahead, clear things out and look at the final result. And we'll start from the top and work ourselves all the way down to the bottom. So the first thing that we have changed is we've updated our imports to add in 2 additional imports. One, load.env. This is going to help load all of our environment variables. And the second one is going to be from LiteLLM. LiteLLM will come included whenever you install CrewAI, but what it does is it's a super awesome library that makes it very easy to start interfacing with all of the most common LLM providers out there. In our case, we're just going to use LiteLLM completions to go off and start making some requests to OpenAI to generate that random city and fun fact for us. That's all we're trying to do. Now, it is super important in order to do this example that you go off and create and update your environment variables to include and basically make sure your .env file includes your OpenAI key. So make sure, hop over to OpenAI, grab your OpenAI key, paste it in your environment variables so that this will properly run for you. Cool. Now, once we've done that, let's go ahead and dive into our flow now that we have our environment set up and using OpenAI. So what are we doing in here? First things first, we need to set a property inside of this class. In our case, we're going to say, hey, I just want you to use GPT-4o Mini when it comes to accessing and generating anything inside of OpenAI. Cool, so that's our model. Now, here's where we're actually going to start working with our 2 different steps inside of our flow. So step 1, which is going to be all about generating that city. Let me show you what we're going to do. First off, we are going to say, okay, you are my starting point. when I start to generate a city. And to do that, I'm going to use the completions library from Light LLM. And what I'm going to do is just hard code and say, yes, this is my model that I'd like to use. And for the purpose of this example, all I want to do is just pass in a single message saying, hey, please go off and return me the name of a random city in the world. Super straightforward. From there, what we're going to do is, if you've used OpenAI before, there's like a ton of like responses. Grab the first response, get the message, get the content. So this is just all straightforward working with OpenAI. And we're just going to go ahead and grab that random city. And like we talked about earlier, we give you the ability inside of flows to return the value from one step to the next. So that's all we're doing here. We're going to go, okay, cool. I just made that random city. I'm now going to return that city so that everyone that's listening to the generate city function to get finished will all have access to this random city that we just generated. In this example, all we have is one single listener listening for the generate city to wrap up. So what we're going to do is this function will get kicked off immediately next once we finish, and it will take in that random city. And all we're going to do in our case is say, okay, cool, I got it. I got the random city. Now I would like to make a new completion. And the whole point of this completion is to say, hey, OpenAI, please tell me a fun fact about, in our case, New York, San Francisco, whatever random city got generated. Cool. Once again, we're going to pull out that fun fact from our response. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to return that fun fact so that this is the final event that's happening inside of our flows, which means it will now be the final result that we can end up showing to our users. So this fun fact will come out right here, and this is how we can access it after running the kickoff. Okay, cool. So now that you've kind of seen this in action and we've walked through everything from top to bottom, let's go ahead and actually kick this flow off together so that you can see it in action. So go ahead, open up your terminal, let's clear things out and start running this flow. So first things first, you need to make sure that you are actually using your proper environment. Now, the easiest way to do that is whenever you just type in which Python, I think we might have talked about this earlier, but just make sure your environment right here, you'll click enter interpreter path, and you'll just go ahead and copy and paste this interpreter path up here inside of VS Code or Cursor. If you're on a PC, you'll just type in where Python and do the exact same thing to make sure that you are actively working in the environment that we set up earlier. So big note on that one. Cool. Now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and start running this example that we put together. What we can do is just type in Python, and we are in the first example set. So we'll do one basic flow, and this is the basic flow Python class. So let's go ahead and run it. Then the first time, it usually takes a few seconds for CrewAI to find everything. But what's pretty cool is you can see it did exactly what we asked it to do. So first things first, it's going to say, I'm starting the flow. And what's cool is like, obviously this is our starting point. So we would expect this to be the first thing to get printed. Exactly what happened. OpenAI, please go make that random city for me. Print it out, looks great. And just to prove to you guys that information is getting passed from one step in our flow to the next, you can see right down here when we go off to generate our fun fact, we are receiving a random city. And that's exactly what you'll see right here. Then we can start taking action on this in a very step-oriented approach. And then what we can do is go, cool, I got your city, I'll generate a fun fact. Now let's return it. And that's what you'll see right here. Whenever we go off and generate a fun fact, this is coming from a result, which was the, whatever the last function to run inside of our flow will become the result. So super awesome. And I hope you guys see like this is a very straightforward event where we have one function spinning a result to the other. But with flows, we have so much capabilities that you'll see it later on and further on examples to where you can have one initial step and then 3 follow-up steps all running in parallel. You can have 3 starting functions and then you'll wait for all of them to get done. And then you'll take in all that information and aggregate it into one follow-up step. There's so much that you guys can do. So I'm super excited to get into this as we progress throughout this course. So let's go ahead and head over to the next example where we're going to start going off and working with a little bit more state. So we're going to add in a little bit more complexity and show you guys just how awesome flows can be. So see you guys in the next example. All right, guys, welcome to example number 2. And in this example, in the follow-up example, we're going to talk all about state management inside of your flows. So what the heck is state management? Well, inside of our flows, we are giving you access to a global state property. And what's so nice about this state property is that it is one shared dictionary that you can access between all of your different steps inside of your flows. Because if you remember in the last example, we set it up so that, basically step number 1 would go off and do its work, and then it would return the value immediately down whoever's listening to it. Well, with state, what you can do is go, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to update this global dictionary. That way I don't have to worry about passing information around. It's always right here. And I can just go ahead and say like, hey, I want to set this state. I want to set a property to it, or later on, I want to get a specific value from it. So very straightforward, but let's go ahead and look at an example so we can see state in action. And to start, we're going to focus on an unstructured state. And this will become more clear as we compare and contrast it to structured state in the next example. So what is unstructured state? Well, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, by default, self.state is just an empty dictionary. It doesn't have any keys, any values, nothing. It's just a blank dictionary. And it's up to us as the developers to say, okay, cool. Well, in this case, for our unstructured example, all I really want to do is just work on changing two things. I want to update my message and I want to slowly work with a counter. So in this example, here's what we're going to do. First things first, we're going to use our start decorator to kick off our first method. And all we're going to do is say, okay, let me just check out what the current state looks like before we run everything. And once we've checked the state, I'm just going to go ahead and set our initial message to hello from unstructured flows. And then from there, what I want to do is set our initial counter to 0. Then what you'll notice is once this function's done, we're going to listen for whenever it's done. And then we're going to kick off our second method. Our second method, we're going to once again log state so we can see what's happening. And then all we're going to do is start appending and updating the values inside of our state. And what you'll notice is we're just going to add a little bit to message and bump up our counter. And just to like bring it home, we're going to do it one more time. We're now going to listen for whenever our second method finishes. And then we're going to once again, just make a few changes, update our message and state. Just so you can see it's global. We can access it anywhere throughout our entire flow. Cool. So let's go ahead and run this example so that you guys can see unstructured flows and state management in action. So open up your terminal once again, and this time we're going to do Python, and this is example number 2, and we're going to go ahead and call unstructured flow. So what we would expect to see is for it to go method 1, 2, 3, and along the way we would like to see our state gradually be incremented and updated as we go. And that's exactly what's happening inside of our code. So let's dive through this part by part and actually look and compare it to our code just to make sure it's working. So whenever we start out, we said, all right, whenever we're in first method, we want to start the flow and we want to look at what the current float is before the current state, before we go off and actually start executing and updating our state management. And you can see, yeah, right out the gate, before we do anything, state is it's just an initial empty dictionary. There's nothing in it. It's up to us to update it. Once we go ahead and start making changes in it, you can see in our second method, like, oh yeah, we were able to go ahead and update message and counter. And then in our third method, we were able to continually keep adding in additional values. Now, what's so nice is that not only when you're working with flows and you have access to state management, what's so cool is you can actually, after you've run your entire flow, you can access that state. So let's just say you had a bunch of different events going off in parallel, doing work over here, doing work over here. And once you're done, you just want to go, hey, what was this piece of information? And what was this piece of information inside of our state? Well, you can do that. You'll just, after running your flow, you'll just go ahead and access the state property on your flow, and you can go ahead and look at it. So in our case, hey, what was the final state after running my flow? Oh, well, it was our message that we updated numerous times, and we updated the counter. Okay, super cool. Now that you've kind of seen unstructured flows in action, I want to go ahead and hop over to structured flows, which give you some more guardrails and some type safety and are all around just a little bit more safe. So let's go ahead and hop over to example number 3 so you can see structured flows in action. All right, guys, welcome to example number 3, where we're going to start looking at structured state management inside of our flows. Now, like I said in the previous video, structured flows give us some type safety and guardrails as we're going off and updating our state and accessing different properties. In addition to that, they also provide autocomplete. So now I've given like the key benefits. Let's talk about like how the heck do I start using these structured flows and what's different. So first things first, the major difference when it comes to working with structured flows is you need to pass in an initial state into your flow. So you can see in our case, we're just going to say, hey, our example state includes a counter and a message. And in our case, counter is a number, message is just an empty string. Now, once you defined this initial state as a class, what you can go ahead and do And it is real fast, just important to mention that this initial state that you're creating, you need to inherit from pedantic base model. So make sure, super important, that whenever you're creating your initial state to inherit from that. Awesome. Now, once you've created this initial default class with default values, what you can see is whenever we're creating our flow, we're now using square brackets to say, okay, here's my default state. And what we're doing is passing it in right here. And this is different because remember in unstructured flows, we didn't do any of this square bracket nonsense. So what we're doing now is just saying, okay, to use a structured flow, I just need to provide structure to my flow so it understands what the heck am I working with. So now that you've seen how we set it up, let's actually show you some of the benefits in action. So benefit number one, like I said, it provides for some guardrails and autocomplete. So now whenever I'm working with state, you can see that I now have access to, oh, I have a message that I can work with. And then I also have a counter that I can work with. So this is all because of the fact that I passed in my initial state. Because if I hop back over to our unstructured method and I start working with state, it's basically just gonna be like, hey, dude, you're an empty dictionary. I have no idea what you want me to work with. That's one of the key benefits. And then type safety. The other thing that's super important is these default values that you've passed in. So right now you can see when our updated structured state management flow, you can see right out the gate, we're not just setting the counter, we're actually interacting with it and updating it. And the reason we're able to do this is because, well, we have a default value. So in our case, counter by default is 0. So what I'm going to do is now I'm able to increment it. If you had tried to do something like this over an unstructured flow land, right out the gate tried updating values, this would cause a major error because if you remember, by default, our state is just an empty dictionary. So there's no way that you can update the counter property in a dictionary where it doesn't exist yet. This would just throw some major errors. So these default values are super powerful and just give you a really good starting place inside of your flows. Then all around, this is pretty much the exact same as the other function that we just looked at, except now we're just using more structured state management. So let's go ahead and run this so you can see it in action. It should be, like I said, just the exact same, but so let's go ahead, clear it, and then let's run. In our case, this is example number 3, structured flow and structured flow. So let's go ahead and run it. Oops, sorry, misspelled Python. So now whenever I run this, you can go ahead and see, okay, cool. Right now, whenever I'm gonna go ahead and first log our initial state, you can see, oh, by default, I'm not an empty dictionary anymore. By default, before I've made a single change, I can see, oh yeah, I have a counter and I have a message. So this is just like, hey, this is how structured state management really is beneficial, and now you've seen it in action. You'll see it much more in action later on as we work with some of our bigger examples. Okay, I want to drop a few pieces of information that I think you guys will find helpful as you're going off building your own flows. Piece of advice number 1, you cannot mix and match when it comes to flows. You can't do half structured and half unstructured, meaning you can't do self dot state and then we'll call it dummy value equals 2. If you try and do something like this, it's going to go, hey, this doesn't exist on your structured state, so I'm throwing an error. I have no idea what you're trying to get me to do. This is on purpose because what we want to do is add in some guardrails. So if you're going to go structured, stick to structured. If you're going to do unstructured, stick to unstructured. Cool. Now, what else is super nice? Well, when it comes to working with our state, what I like to do with structured state, advice number 2, is when I'm first building out my applications using flows, I like to stick to unstructured just so I can quickly crank one of these flows out if I need to, have global state management throughout my flow. So once I get all of this working and, I'm using the square bracket approach to access and set properties in my dictionary, once I have this working, I'll usually take a step back and then go ahead and implement a structured flow. That way, going forward, as I make changes, I have guardrails and I don't end up accidentally doing something and doing basically like a misspell of like counter, like basically let autocomplete help me. Okay, cool. So hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully you understand everything now when it comes to working with structured flows and unstructured flows. So now that we worked on passing information in our basic example from function 1 to function 2, you've seen 2 different types of state management, unstructured and structured. Let's go ahead and now hop into what my favorite part of working with flows is, which is how we can actually conditionally manage the way we structure different steps inside of our flows. So let's go ahead and hop over to example number 4, where we have 3 different mini modules to show you guys all the different capabilities that you can do with flows. So see you guys in the next example. All right, guys, so now it's time for us to dive into section 4, where you're going to look at 3 different small examples so you can see how you can conditionally control our flows inside of our application. So Let's go ahead and dive into the first example, which is going to be talking all about OR. And one of my favorite parts about working flows is the keywords that we're learning do exactly what they sound like. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So in this example, we're going to focus on OR. And what OR allows us to do is update our listeners. So here's exactly what's going on. In our case, we are going to be listening. In our case, we have a logger, and our logger is going to be listening to either the start method or keyword or the second method. And when either of these functions finish, we're going to go ahead and trigger this right here. So this is a super nice way to go ahead and, if you need to react to multiple things going on, in our case, a logger, which would just, go ahead and print the result. We can go ahead and say, oh yeah, this makes sense. Whenever start method gets done working, I want my logger to print and save the result. Whenever my second method is finished, I want to print and log the result. So that's exactly what's happening inside of our code. And the key here is just make sure you import or underscore from CrewAI flows. And what you need to do is just inside of your listener, before you go off and start adding your methods, just add in the OR function to say, hey, I just want to listen to these, and you can just keep adding on more and more conditions, as many as your heart desires. Okay, cool. So now that you've seen how ORs work and look like in the code, let's go ahead and run it so you can see them in action. And what we'll do real fast is let's go ahead and clear this up and start running our first example inside of our conditional flows module. So we'll do Python 4, and this is the first example, which is all about OR. So let's go ahead and run it and talk about what we would like to see. So to start, we should see starting flow. Then we should see that this function finishes, and it should immediately trigger off two things. One, start method should immediately trigger off the second function because, hey, it's listening to our start method, but also our logger is listening to the start method. So when we come down here and look at our logs, you can see, okay, this got triggered, then this got triggered, and at the exact same time in parallel, our logger got triggered. So you can kind of see down here, starting flow was triggered up here. Then, because these two were getting triggered in parallel, we should instantly see our second method runs, check, and our logger should run, check. And you can also see that our logger is not only listening, but it's accepting whatever result was kicked out of this function. All around super cool. Then what would we expect next? Well, whenever our second method finishes, we are listening to it once again with our logger. So we would expect to see one final log going, okay, hey, second method finishes up. What do I want to do? I want to log the result. And that's exactly what we're doing right here. So I'm hoping you guys can kind of see the power of like, okay, cool. I now know how I can make sure when I'm working inside my flows, if I ever have this situation where I need to listen to multiple things happening, this is the approach to go. Anytime any of these functions finish, whether start method or second method or keyword, I'll go ahead and take an action. So all around, this is super cool. Now, what we're gonna do next is hop over to learning about and. So let's go ahead and hop over to the next example inside of conditional flows. All right, guys, so now it's time to dive into and does exactly what you think it should do. Inside of a listener, we can now update it to say, hey, I only want you to trigger this function when the start method and the second method finish. So wait until both of these methods finish off, and when they're done, then go off and trigger our logger. So what's gonna happen in this example is our start method's gonna get triggered right out the gate. Then we're going to say, all right, well, who's listening for start method? In our case, that's going to be our second method is listening and our logger, okay? Then what's gonna happen next is, well, this gets triggered off because it's only listening to one thing. So start method, then second method. Now, once our second method is done, okay, ta-ding, we have now met all the criteria because we've now completely finished the start method and the second method. They're both done. Now we can go off and trigger our logger. So what we would expect to see is a print statement, another print statement, and then when we finally go ahead and update our logger, we're just gonna print state. So we should be able to see both of these pieces of information. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it so that you can see and in action. So we're gonna go do Python. This is the fourth module, and we're just gonna look at example 2 focused on and. So print, and then state. That's exactly what we'd expect to see. So start method, check, second method, check. And then in the final one, that should only get triggered when both of the previous functions are done. This is now where we're gonna see the state from that we updated in both of the two previous steps. So I hope this is starting to make sense. And provide you guys a lot of flexibility, because in the world where you ever want to go off and like, let's say you wanted to set up a flow to like, hey, I'm going to go scrape LinkedIn, I'm going to scrape Twitter, and I'm going to go ahead and scrape another social media site. And I only want to go off and write a summary once I have the inputs from all of my previous scrapings. This is exactly how you would do it. So just a quick recap. If this was scrape YouTube, scrape LinkedIn, and another one was scrape, go ahead and scrape X, you could go ahead and say, hey, I don't want to take action until I'm done scraping all of my different services that are running in parallel. And once they're done, I can then synthesize all the data in a follow-up step that will only get triggered once all of these different methods are finished. And once again, you could continually add in as many ands as you want in here, and this function will not get triggered until all of the previous functions finish running. So hopefully that makes sense. And now that you've seen the two different types, or and, let's go ahead and dive into the most exciting, a little bit more complicated, but most exciting part, which is going to be working with the router, which will allow you to dynamically go ahead and change completely different paths inside of your flows. So let's go ahead and hop over to example number 3 inside of this conditional flows. All right, guys, so now it's time for us to start looking at routers. And routers are nothing more than a new decorator that we can start adding inside of our flows. And all they do is route you down different branches inside of your flows. The best example I like to give when it comes to working with routers is to think of it as like if you're building a chatbot, and this chatbot was to go ahead and its whole purpose was to send people to the proper representative in the organization. So if a customer asked, hey, this broke, can you please give me support? Oh, we need to send them down the support pipeline for help. Oh, the customer wants to buy a new product. We need to send them down the sales path to meet with a sales representative so they can buy from us. So as you can see, based on a different category, however we categorize the initial question that was asked to us, we'll send them down path A for sales, path B for support, so forth and so forth. Well, that's exactly what routers allow you to do. We dynamically allow you to branch down different parts of your flows depending on different conditions. So let's look at this example in action, walk through it so you can see like, oh yeah, routers are branching me inside of our flows. So to start, to go ahead and show you what's happening, whenever we kick off our router flow, all we're going to do is say, okay, to simulate making a decision, we're just randomly going to generate true or false. Then once we have randomly generated that value, we're going to save it to our state as the success flag. Now here's where routers come in. We're going to go, okay, cool. Inside the router, whenever the start method finishes, we're going to trigger this function. And the whole purpose of the router is to say, I'm going to go down path A, path B, or path C. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to go, okay, cool. Well, was the success flag true? If it was, we want to send people down the success branch. Now, this is a new term because everything up until now, if you return something, it was just a value passed down to the next step inside of our flows. But with a router, you're not returning a value, you're returning a whole new path to go down. So you can see now we're going, oh, okay. If things were successful, I now want to go down the success branch. And the way I'm going to go down the success branch is by updating a following on listener to listen for this new branch. So in the past, everything has been our listeners have always had a function name in here. Well, with routers, you're going to go down different branches and it's up to you to create those branches, different pathways. So this is where you'll go, oh, okay, I now start needing to use strings. So that's what we're going to say. We're going to go down the success branch and okay, cool. We're going down that branch. I want to listen whenever we go down the success branch to start triggering off these functions. Okay. Likewise, if we're not successful and we fail, okay, I want to go down the failed branch. So now I'm going to start listening for the failed branch to get triggered. And when it does, cool, I'll start going down the rest of this flow logic. So hopefully this is starting to make sense where we're going to start off, do some work. Then we're going to have our router go, okay, I'm listening for work. And based on some conditions, I'll either go down path A or path B or path C. You can have unlimited different branches. It's up to you to define them. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. I do just want to quickly recap something that's very important. You need to make sure that this branch, this string, this return value matches this branch here. If you accidentally forgot an S or something at the very end, well, this will never get triggered because, this never gets returned. So please, please, please make sure when you're using routers and, really beefing up your flows, getting fancy, you need to make sure that these strings match your listeners down here. Okay, cool. So now that I've hopefully got you hyped up about routers, I love this part. I'm going to go ahead and run it so you can see in action, and you can hopefully see like, oh yeah, sometimes we go down this branch, sometimes we go down this branch. Let's go ahead and look at it in action. So we're going to come down here and we're going to start running in our fourth module. This is example number 3. And we're going to go, okay, cool. Let's go ahead and run this. So sometimes we would expect this. Other times we would expect this one. So you can see out the gate, we went ahead and triggered method number 3, which means cool, we went down the success path. Let's try running it again. You know, it's random, so we might have to run it a few times to eventually we get the 4th method. So yeah, cool. So it took a few tries. So eventually on the 3rd try, you can see, oh, we randomly are going down false. So whenever we hit false, oh, cool, we're going to go down the failed branch. And now we're going to trigger the 4th method. So hopefully you guys are starting to see the power of this. And going back to the sales example where you're really categorizing based on a condition and then going, oh, support or sales. Or for example, if you're going to go off, another example is lead scoring. So if you're going to hire a candidate, well, ooh, this candidate scored a C. Ooh, yeah, that's not, we don't want to hire a C candidate. Cool. Let's go ahead and send them down the rejected branch to where we're going to type them up a letter saying, hey, we appreciate your interest for this job, but not the time. And if a candidate scored an A, we'd go, okay, cool. I need to send them down the request a follow-up interview so that we can get them hired branch. So hopefully this is starting to make sense to where you can dynamically respond inside of a single flow to all sorts of different conditions. So, all right. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's go ahead and start beefing up our flows even more. And we're going to start introducing our crews into our flows. So this is where we're going to get all the magic of working with code, with all the magic of working with crews. Super excited for you guys to see this in action. So let's go ahead and hop over to module number 5. All right, guys, welcome to module number 5, where we're just going to start combining the power of flows with crews. I'm super excited for you guys to see this in action, and it's actually super simple to set up, and that's exactly what I wanted to show you guys first. Instead of going off and manually typing everything up, what we can do now is use the CrewAI CLI, so command line interface, to go ahead and generate a new project for us that contains all proper project setup to make this super easy to run. So what we can do is we will, inside of our project, go over to this folder, so flows with crews. And what we can do now is start using the CrewAI CLI. So what we can do is type in CrewAI, create, because we want to create something. And what do we want to create? A flow. And let's just call this our demo flow. And what we'll do is go ahead and just press enter, and it will go off and create a new flow for us and all the proper, like you see, it just went ahead and create everything for us. And it's a little hard to see, but you can see inside of our example number 5, module number 5, it created our new project structure for us. Okay, so before we dive into the code, I do want to go ahead and point out like what the heck's going on, because I know there's been a bunch of changes in CrewAI, so I want to just make this like super straightforward and understand what's going on. So inside of CrewAI, when you're working with flows, we have actually structured out a project for you so that it's super straightforward to actually combine everything together. So inside of your source folder, you'll notice the name of your project. So in our case, we called it demo flow. Over here, well, inside of here, what you'll notice is you have access, and it gets spun up with 2 different folders and a main file. So our main file is where we're actually going to store our flow, just like we've been doing all throughout the rest of our project. This main.py file is where everything's actually going to run. Now, outside of that, we have a few other folders. The crews folder is where you can go ahead and actually add in your crews, because as you'll see later on, and some of the other examples I'm going to point out at the end of the video, you might actually want to have multiple crews happening inside of one flow. So one crew might synthesize some data, while another crew goes off and generates some data, and all of this needs to happen in one flow. So this is exactly how you can get multiple crews to work together. For each different crew, you'll just create a new one right in here in your crews folder. Cool. Outside of that, we want to make it so that you can have tools that can get shared across multiple crews. So that's why we have a high-level tools folder. So, if you're building a flow that works primarily on YouTube data, you might have one set of YouTube tools that get used throughout both of your different crews. Okay, cool. Hopefully that's making sense. Now, let's actually talk about something else. If you have begun to work with CrewAI, you notice that we now have a PyProject.toml file. This is how we manage all dependencies for your crew projects. There has been a big change recently to where we have migrated over from Poetry over to UV. Quick background, what's happening is a lot of these AI packages are super beefy and they took forever to install. By switching over to UV, it's happened. We install everything lightning fast now. So I'm going to show you that in here just a second, but I did just want to point out this is a big difference. So no longer can you do poetry install. Going forward, it's UV, but we don't even have to do that because good news, everything's wrapped up inside of the CrewAI CLI. So let me show you what I'm talking about. What you'll notice is now what we can do, let's CD into our new project, demo flows. And real fast, I do want to go ahead and update our .envs. So you can see by default, our environment variables are your API key. What we need to do is just go ahead and copy our initial one, paste it in here. All right, cool. That was a close one. We almost messed up. Now, what we can go ahead and do once we're in our project, what we want to do is first install our dependencies, and then we want to run our flow. So what we can do first is we can do CrewAI install. And what this will do is it will go off and install all the dependencies we need to run this project. So in our case, you can see, hey, I just went CrewAI and CrewAI tools. So let's go ahead and run this. And the first install usually takes the longest, but like I said, that was lightning fast. So I hope you guys are seeing how awesome UV is when it comes to installing. Now, some of these packages were already cached. That's why it was super fast. Your first time might take a little bit longer, but after that, it's boom, lightning fast. Cool. So now we are set up to go off and run our flow. But before I do that, let's actually probably take a step back and say like, hey, what the heck are we trying to run here before we just go off and kick off our flow? So here's what we're doing. We are going to write a poem using flows, but in order to do this, we are going to combine the power of code with the power of Crew. So what are we gonna do? Well, to start off our poem flow, which at this point, hopefully some of the keywords are clicking, this is going to be a structured state flow where we're going to say, okay, my structured state, I'm going to have a sentence count to determine how many sentences I want there to be in my poem. And then I'm going to have a string where I can store my actual poem. Okay, cool. Makes sense. So let's go ahead and run this. So whenever we first kick off this flow, we're going to generate a sentence count. So it's going to be between 1 and 5. Then what we're going to do is go, okay, cool. I now know I need to generate a sentence. I generate a poem, but now I need to go ahead and figure out, am I going to do 1 to 5 sentences? Well, that is where we can start using passing inputs into our crews. So you can see in step number 2, we're going to focus on generating that poem. And because this is an AI task where we're actually going to be leaning on CrewAI to go off and perform this action for us, we can go, okay, in my generate poem step, what I want to do is go ahead and use my poem crew to go ahead and kick off a new crew that's going to create a poem using this sentence count. So you can see we're kind of using state to go off and actually go, okay, cool. I need to generate a poem with 3 sentences. Okay, so a lot is happening between this line, and I don't just want to hand wave over it. I want to dive into how the heck this is actually working, because if you're coming from like old school CrewAI, this will probably be like, what the heck's going on? And so let's go ahead and dive into what's happening. Well, what we're doing is we're going to go, okay, cool. I created a poem crew that is over here in my poem crew folder that gets created by default. What you'll notice in here, there's actually a poem crew file. And this poem crew contains all of the specific agents and tasks we need to write a poem. So you can see for simplicity, we only have 2 things in here. We have a single agent, poem writer, and we have an individual task whose whole job is to go off and write the poem. And in order to create a crew, you notice that we need to pass in our agents and our task. Now, a lot has changed in this, and we're going to keep diving deeper just because I want to give a deep dive on how the heck this is all working. So one of the things that you'll notice is, man, this is kind of weird. I'm defining my agent here, but down here, I'm just calling out self.agent. How am I able, I don't see agents anywhere. I just see an agent decorator. Well, what's happening under the hood to make this even simpler for you guys is as you're going off and creating these crews using our new format, what's actually happening is under the hood, you're actually slowly adding these agents to self.agent. So if you added 10 more agents right here, they would just keep getting added to self.agents. That way you can go ahead and just access your agents right here. Just like the note says, all of these are created by adding the agent decorator. Very similarly, when it comes to working with task, you can add all the tasks you want right here. And as you get done adding them, they'll be added right here. And it is important to note, as you go off and are creating your crews, the order is important. In this example, just with regular crew, it goes task 1 gets done, then task 2, then task 3. So this would get kicked off first because it's at the top of the file. Then this will get kicked off because it's second. So order is important when defining your task. It is not important when defining your agents. Okay, so now this makes sense how I'm adding in agents into my crew. But now what doesn't make sense is like, what the heck is this config file? Like, why? Like, I see it says config. Where is this coming from? Great question. Well, inside of our new approach with working with CrewAI, everything is defined in YAML files. So what you can do is you'll now see we have an agents.yaml file and a task.yaml file. So what's happening in here is, let's look at our agent first. We're going to say, all right, you're a professional poem writer. Your role is a CrewAI poem writer. Your job is to write funny, lighthearted poems about CrewAI in this sentence count. And what's interesting is you'll notice, sentence count is in curly brackets. What's also weird is that this is being a variable. And if I remember back to a while ago, I saw that variable before. It just so happens that this was an input that we were passing into our crew. So it's super cool. It's like, this is where the worlds start merging. We are now passing in our sentence count from state into our crews. So hopefully this is making sense. So sentence count, the way we're able to access it is by inside of our YAML files. We just use curly brackets to go, okay, cool. This was a variable that I want to pass in. So all we have to do is just say name of the variable and put curly brackets around it. And once we actually go off and compile it and CrewAI compiles it under the hood, it'll go, oh, you need to do a sentence count of 4. So that's what's going to happen eventually once all of this gets processed and interpolated. Okay, but outside of that, just know CrewAI, poem writer, is going to write a poem. Similarly, this task.yaml file is going to do the exact same thing. It's going to go, okay, I'm here to write a poem. I want to write about a poem how CrewAI is awesome, which it is. And then what we're going to do is go, okay, cool. Once again, I want to make sure it has a sentence count of insert variable here. And then I want to make sure my expected output is a beautiful poem with exactly this many sentences. And if you wanted to, just to like show you guys what is all possible, you can go off, let me save this. If you wanted to, you can also pass in more variables here. I just want to like show you guys a realm of possible. I know this is taking a bit longer, but we could also say style. And then we could say, I want this to be in the style of funny, but serious. And then, okay, well, cool. Over here now, I could say, and in the style of style. So hopefully you're kind of seeing like, oh, that is pretty cool. It's pretty straightforward to pass in these inputs into my actual YAML files. Okay, so let's clear everything up and go back to our initial state. Great, so this is all looking awesome. So hopefully this is making sense. We dove deep into our poem crew. We talked about it. This all makes sense. Looks good. I understand this is very similar to old style CrewAI. The only difference, big difference so far, is when we're defining our agents and tasks, we're just going to pull it all from our config file, which we defined up here and over here in this config folder. Okay, cool. The only other thing that is different is this crew method. Just know whenever you're defining a crew in this new format, it's getting wrapped in a crew base, and crew base, in order to actually get the crew from this, let's see, def crew. It's not going to show it right now. I was thinking about the wrong part, but just know in order to actually like get this crew, you have to call the crew method. So this is just like the structure of a crew. This is like the thing of the recipe. And to get the actual crew from it, you have to call .crew. So just something that's new. Just keep it on your radar as you're going off, and just know this is like the instructions. And this is, okay, no, this is the real deal. This is the blueprint and this is the house. Cool. So once we have the full crew in action, now we can go, cool, it's time to call kickoff like we've done time and time before. And now we can pass in our appropriate variables that we've grabbed from state. Awesome. Now, once we're done, what we can do is go, okay, cool. I would like to go ahead and print that generated poem. So you can go, okay, cool. Here's the poem. I grab the result because kickoff takes a little bit to run. Once we're done, we're going to get the result. And in our case, what we're going to do is we just want to grab the raw string. So the raw poem that gets generated. The reason why it's called raw is just because in crew kickoff land, you have the option to generate types. I know I'm kind of going the weeds, but I just want like, there's a lot that has changed. So I just want to like throw a lot out there at you. Please, if you have comments, hop over into the comments down below, ask away, or that free Skool community I mentioned, please ask. Also, CrewAI has some support docs as well. So we have a bunch of different resources. We just want to make sure you guys are fully supported as you're going off and building your awesome crews. But just know, whenever you get done generating something from a crew, you have to be able to access it, and the .raw value will get the string version of it. If you kind of set up your crew to spit back a JSON object, you could call, we have a few different options. You could call dict to get the JSON representation. If you did a pedantic object, you can call model dump. So we just wanted to give you guys as many different options to get back whatever type of data you requested. Awesome. So now generate poem is done. We're going to listen for it. And the final thing we're going to do is save our poem to a text file. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually look at this in action. And eventually I'm going to cover these cool new methods for you down here called plot. So how the heck do we run it now that we've talked about it together? So what we can do, hop down here. And now that we're in our demo flow, what we can do is called CrewAI. And then in our case, we'll just call it kickoff. Sorry, CrewAI flow kickoff. And the best way I like to think about it is like CrewAI, that's the tool I'm using. What am I working with? A flow. Now, what the heck would I like to do with it? Well, in my case, I'd like to kick it off. If you ever forget what are the options that you have, feel free to come back over to the pyproject.toml file and you can see, oh, I can kick it off or I can plot it. So hopefully that makes sense. So CrewAI flow kickoff. Now this will go off and do everything that we just talked about. It's going to start running the flow. It's going to go ahead and start. First time takes the longest. After that, it's super speedy. But what it's going to go off and do, go ahead and generate that random number. Once it generates that random number, we're going to go kick off that poem, create it. Then, so the crew's running. You can see, ta-da. Now we're generating, how many sentences do we say? So we're going to write a sentence of 4. So a poem of 4 sentences, all around pretty cool. And then what you can see at the very end is it's done. We got the result and we are finally saving it. And I can actually access this saved poem. So you can see down here, I have our poem, which looks awesome, guys. Super freaking cool. So hopefully you can see that we've now combined the power of flows with crews. So now I want to go ahead and show you something else that you can do when it comes to running your flows. So far you've seen how we have run CrewAI flow kickoff to go ahead and kick off our flows just like this. Well, now it's time for us to dive into the other option, which is to start running plot, which will go ahead and generate a visualization of your plot. So how do we do this? Well, we can use, once again, our CrewAI CLI to call CrewAI flow plot. This will go off and generate a new plot. So you can see plotting the flow. And then once it's done, we'll see a new file down here that will actually be an HTML file that we can go off and look at an interactive version of our flow. So we're going to go ahead and do this together super fast. Let me go ahead and get this open for you guys so that you can see that we have this set up and actually can look at our new flows together. So let me go ahead and move this down here so you guys can see what I'm seeing. So let's make this a little bit bigger. What you'll notice is now is inside of our module 5, where we're working on our demo flow, you can see that we have CrewAI flow HTML right here. So it's the name of our project. So you can see, I'm gonna go ahead and open this up and you can see it's a really cool looking version of our flow. So let's go ahead and make this full screen. I'll bring it back over here so you guys can see it interactive. And I want to walk through everything that you're seeing so it all makes sense. So what are we looking at? Well, right now you can see that we have multiple different steps going on in our flow. So first things first, we have up top our generate sentence count. And this is denoted as an orange method because it's represented by start. So start is an orange block. And that's exactly what we had over here inside. Our start method was generate sentence count. That's exactly what's right here. Next, what you can see is we were calling a crew method. So in our generate poem, we were calling a crew. So that's why you'll notice this second method is orange and white, just like it is down here. And then finally, we're just going to do a plain old regular code method. And that's why this save poem is denoted as just a regular old plain method right here. So hopefully this makes sense. I think it's pretty cool. It's a nice way to visualize all what you're doing. And as you go off and potentially add in routers to where you're going down different branches, or you're working with, certain other types of codes to where you have like one event triggers off 5, like all of those different types of flows that you could create. Super easy. You can just plot them, look at them as an HTML, and go ahead and take screenshots, whatever you'd like to do with them. So all around, super exciting new feature. So if you don't have any other questions about this, what we're going to do next is we're going to start diving in deeper into actually going off and working with and creating our more advanced flow, where now that we're going to put everything that we've just learned together and we're going to start putting it together to go off and write a 20,000 word book together. So I'm super excited for you guys to see this in action. So let's go ahead and hop over to our final module. All right, guys, welcome to module number 6, where we're going to have a flow write an entire book for us. I'm so excited for you guys to see this example in action because it's going to tie everything that we've been working on so far into one awesome example. Now, just a quick side note, if you do like these type of real world examples with flows, if you hop over to the flow documentations over on CrewAI, I have an example linked down below. What you'll notice is there's a bunch of other real world examples that you can use, and we have code for each one of these so you can see these in action and go off and use them for inspiration to go on and create your own crews. Cool. Enough of that. Let's hop back to our example of creating a book using flows. Now, what's super important about this flow is that we're going to be using multiple crews together to go off and write this book. So without diving into the code yet, let's look at a high-level overview of what's about to happen before we dive into the code so it all makes sense. So, and just to give you a quick side note, I do want to even take a step back further to understand why this is so important, especially because we are overcoming some of the limiting parts of CrewAI with flows. So let's quick history lesson. With regular Crew, it would be very, very hard, if not impossible, to write a very large book. You're fighting two major things. One is you're fighting context windows. So you remember a context window right now, I think we can max output 8,000 tokens. So that's roughly around 2,000 words, when it 2,000 to 3,000 words whenever you're working with like a ChatGPT 4.0 mini. That's as max you can get. So obviously 3,000 word book is not a, that's not a book. That's more of like a short paragraph or, a short story. So that's issue one, context window. Issue number two, when it comes to CrewAI, it is pretty much like do task one, outline book. Now, once you're done with task one, do task two, which is in our case, write book. So outline, then write. Well, the issue is like, okay, well, what I really want to happen though is like, I want to outline a book and I want to have chapter, and I want to basically go off and generate multiple tasks. I want to dynamically generate tasks. And for each task, then I want to kick off the next crew. So right now, CrewAI does not have that dynamic task capabilities. So we can actually substitute flows in here to go off and do this. So let me show you what I mean. Now, what we can do is go, okay, what I would like to do is have a crew go off and outline a book. That's one of the crews that you're about to see in flows. This book outline crew will go off and say, oh, well, for this book, it looks like you probably need, let's just say 6 different chapters to really write a great book. So I will generate a chapter outline and I'll do 6 of them to write your book for you. We might work with a different topic and, oh, wait, we need 10 chapters to go off and generate a book for this topic. So we, as you can see, we're dynamically generating some number of chapter outlines. Then for each chapter, we then want to have a crew that will write that chapter. So the keyword here is for each item, do something. So in our case, it's for each chapter, call another crew. So that's exactly what's going to happen inside of our code. We're going to outline a book. It's going to generate 6 chapter outlines, 10 chapter outlines. And for each chapter outline, we're going to pass it over into a crew and we're going to go off and write that chapter in detail. And we're going to get up to, like we said, 2,000 to 4,000 words per chapter, which is very reasonable for a real world chapter. Then once we're done, we're going to pass everything over into a final method where we're going to join and save everything together in one actual complete book. Because a book is nothing more than a bunch of chapters tied together in integrated fashion. Okay, cool. Hopefully this is making sense. So now that we understand everything at a high level, let's go ahead and hop back over to the code so we can see these core steps in action so that when you're off on your own, you'll be able to replicate exactly what we're doing here. All right, cool. So let's walk through the flow top to bottom to understand what's going on, and then let's dive deep into the crews where a lot of the magic's actually happening. To start, what we're doing is we are creating a new flow, book flow, and this is going to be a structured state flow. The reason we know it's structured state is because right here, I'm saying that, hey, this flow is going to be using book state. Our book state, you can see right here, has some general information about the book we are trying to create, such as the title of the book, the goal for the book outline, topic, and additional information. We're also storing some placeholders for the actual book that we will be generating throughout this flow. Okay, cool. Makes sense so far. Now, let's go ahead and actually look, diving deeper, and you don't need this initial state. Sorry about that. You only need this. Okay, so sorry about that. I was old example, but this is all you need to get everything working. Now, let's go ahead and start going from top to bottom with each of the different steps in this flow. So step 1, we are all about generating the outline of the book. So what we're going to do is say, all right, cool. I would like to use the outline crew that we'll look at later and I want you to go off and generate me a outline for a book, and I want the book to be about this topic and this goal. Now, what's super important is to note that we are going to get back a book outline object from this crew. We're going to get a list. So for every chapter, we're going to get a book outline or a chapter outline. And you might be wondering, what the heck is a chapter outline? Well, we're going to start using some types inside of our flows and crews, which are going to be basically allow us to start being a little bit more intentional with the type of returns that we're going to get back. So in our case, if we wanted to write a book about AI in 2024, like we do right here, just current state of AI in September 2024, well, what we might expect is chapter 1 to be the introduction of the entire book. So title 1, Introduction to AI 2024. The description, a brief overview of what's going on in AI in 2024. Chapter 1 could be AI in healthcare. Chapter 2 could be AI in finance. So each one of these will be its own object with a little bit of provide the title of the book and a brief description of what we need to talk about. The reason why we're storing all this is because we're just trying to get just enough information in this book outline. So later, when we go over to write a chapter, we go, oh, you want to do AI in healthcare? Cool. Here's the description as well. Awesome. I have everything I need to know to go off and write a chapter now. So just hopefully this is setting up some context for what's happening. So what we're going to do, this outline crew is going to go off, generate an outline of an entire book, and it's going to spit back to us a bunch of chapter outlines. So it might give us 6, 10, 8, doesn't matter. It's just going to give us back a bunch. And we are going to store all of those outlines to our state. So self.state book outline, we're going to store all of those chapters. And you can look, what the heck is book outline? Well, because we are being structured, we're going to say, oh, well, book outline is nothing more than a list of chapter outlines. Cool. Totally makes sense. Now let's keep chugging along. Well, after generate book outline, the next function that's going to get kicked off is going to be the write chapters. The reason why is because we're listening for whenever book outline is done, we call write chapters. Now, this is where we're going to get a little bit deeper into actually going off and dynamically handling multiple chapter outlines. Because remember, the core problem is some books might need 10 chapters, some might need 5. Either way, we just need to handle that use case. So how do we do it? Well, we are going to, in our write chapters step, we're going to say, cool, what I would like to do is for each chapter outline that we were generated in the previous step, I would like to go off and write a single chapter. Just like this, write chapter. That's all we're doing. So for each one of these outlines, write a chapter. Now, what's the quirk of this is we're going to say, all right, I don't want to go off and write chapter 1, which might take 2 minutes, then write chapter 2, which might take another 2 minutes, and repeat and repeat and repeat. All in all, in this case, that could take 12, 15 minutes. What I would like to happen is to kick all of these off in parallel so that in a way, instead of it taking 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, it's actually just, all in all, it's just 2 minutes beginning to end because these are all running in parallel. So that's exactly what we're doing right here. We're saying, all right, I want to kick off a crew. I want to call the write single chapter function, which is going to do nothing more than call a crew. We'll talk about this more, but just high level, we're just going to spin off each one of these write a chapter crews in parallel. So they're all running in parallel. Each one's writing their own chapter. All right, hopefully that makes sense. How do we do that though? Well, we went ahead and created an asynchronous task. And this asynchronous task, all it's doing is it's going off and writing a single chapter. Write a chapter. What does this function do? Well, it takes in a chapter outline and it goes and passes all of that information into a new crew. In this case, it's going to be write book chapter crew. So this write a book chapter crew is going to take in, hey, what's the goal, topic, chapter title, everything that we've generated so far, we're going to be passing it into here. In addition to that, when it comes to our book outline, all we're trying to do is we also want to pass in all of the other chapters to help. This is just like I found a big improvement doing this. By passing in all the other chapters, it made a very cohesive book. So, it's kind of like if you're writing a book, but I told you what chapter 2 was, but I didn't tell you what chapter 1 or chapter 3 was. You would have no idea of like how to tie things together. So by passing in all the chapters, we have a good idea of what's all going to be in the book as a whole. So found this really improved the quality of the book. All right, so hopefully this is making sense so far. feel free, copy this code, have Cursor explain it to you, ChatGPT explain it to you, but just know all we've done is we have gone off for every book outline chapter. We are going to go off and turn that outline into an actual chapter with text. So hopefully that makes sense. And what we're doing is we're going to go off and create a job, and we're going to wait for all of the chapters to be generated. How do we do that? Right here. We're going to await for all of the chapters to finish up being written. And once they're done, we're going to have a list of all of the different chapters for the book. So what do we do once we have all these chapters? Well, we're going to update our book inside of our state to actually include all of those chapters. So if we come back up to the top, the book, it's nothing more than a list of chapters, exactly what you would expect. It is important to note with the way that this function works is that it'll make sure that chapter 1 stays chapter 1 and chapter 2 stays chapter 2. So you'll see that here in just a second, but I know sometimes with asynchronous functions, it's like, oh, I was going off and turning outline number 3 into a chapter and it finished first. Oh, that should be the first item in the list. Nope, that's not how it works. Whatever task was created first will stay first in the array. So it'll make sure our chapters in our book stay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Sorry for the tangent if you weren't sure what I was talking about. Okay, cool. So after we have written our entire book, what we're going to hop into next is going off and joining and saving all of our chapters together. How do we do this? Well, we're just going to iterate through each one of the chapters in our state. And we're going to say, cool, all I want to do is just put together we're using Markdown. I just want to put the book content. We're basically having one long string, which will represent the entire book. And we're just iterating through each chapter. First things first, we add the chapter title. Second thing, we go off and add the content. So title, content. Next thing we do, title, content. And we just keep repeating title, content, until we've written the entire book. So once it's finally done, then what we'll do is we'll title it, wrap it all together, and we'll say, cool, my book title, I'm just going to grab it from state. Then I'm going to go off, and now that I've joined the entire book together, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I get the title of the book. I want to get it ready and properly formatted so that I can go off and save this book locally to my computer so I can go off and read this markdown version of the book. Cool. So I know that was a lot. Hopefully this is making sense so far. Now what I want to do, because we've gone very overview, high level of how everything ties together, I want to actually dive into the crews so that you can see exactly how we're going to go off and say, book outline crew. Here's how you go off and create a book outline. And here's how you go ahead and start using some of those types that we talked about earlier, such as chapter and chapter outline. So let's clear out all this and go ahead and hop over to our crews. So the first thing we're gonna do is hop back over to our file explorer, and we're gonna go ahead and first look at our outline crew. I'm gonna walk you through this, and then we're gonna dive over to our write book chapter crew. All right, so first things first, what are we doing? Well, inside of our outline crew, we really have two agents and two tasks. What are we trying to do? Well, if we're going to go off and write a book, we need to go off and do some research. So we're going to have a research agent who's going to go off and do all the exploring for us. In our case, it's going to look up the AI trends. Then we're going to have an outliner who's going to take all that research information and go off and go, okay, cool. Now that I know what's happening in the world, I now know I need to go off and write 8 book outline chapters. So that's exactly what's going on inside of this crew. Now, how do we define what the actual logic is and instructions for those agents and tasks? Well, over here in our YAML file, once again, our agents file, we're just going to say, hey, we're going to go off and you need to research this topic. We're using variables, and I want you to go up and look at this goal. You can see exactly how we're passing in our variables. Awesome. Now, when it comes to our task, same thing. I want you to be a little bit more specific. Once again, go off and look at this topic and look at this goal, and here's my expected outcome. So all around, go research the internet. Once you're done, I want you to go off and write a nice book where each chapter is in sequential order, shoot for around this many words. LLMs aren't the best with numbers, but hey, it's still a pretty good guiding principle. All right, now what do we want to do next? Well, I want to use ChatGPT 4.0 when it comes to these agents, just because I want to write a really high quality book, and I found 4.0 is a little bit more intelligent than 4.0 mini, which is the default. Awesome. Now, what else do I want to do inside of this crew? Well, if you remember, what we want to do is we don't just want our crew to go off and just, hey, here's the outline. Here's a bunch of, here's just a long output, string output of here's the outline. we want our crew to return a structured response. How the heck do we do this? Glad you asked that question. In our final task in our crew, we're saying, hey, I want you, when you're generating an outline, I want to make sure your output of this crew is in the form of a book outline. So what the heck is a book outline? Glad you asked again. We can go ahead and click and look at this type, and you can see, oh, a book outline is nothing more than an object where we have some chapters, and each chapter is nothing more than just a list of chapter outlines. And then each chapter outline has a title and description, just like we talked about before. And this totally makes sense because we're generating an outline. So all we want to do is just say, hey man, this book is going to have 10 chapters, and here's the outline for each chapter. Totally makes sense when it comes to working with this crew. Okay, now, how the heck do we actually access that book outline and everything? Well, if you remember back over in our crew, what we were doing towards the end is once we generated all of our chapters, you'll notice that we got an output, and we said we went ahead and grabbed, sorry, I hopped to the wrong section. You can see we went ahead and generated that outline, and then I called output. I grabbed output. How did I know to do this? Well, it's because in the return type of this final crew, this task, which is the final task in this crew, it's going to return this book outline. And this book outline is nothing more than an object with one property in it, chapters. And this is because I set it up this way. Feel free to set up your crews and types however you like differently. But I just said, hey, I want my book outline to have a single property, which is chapters, and I want this chapters to just be a list of all the chapter outlines. So now, whenever I get my output, I can just go ahead and grab the property on there that I want to, in my case, chapters. And this chapters is going to return all of the different chapter outlines in my book. Hopefully this makes sense. I know we're kind of like, a lot of dots are happening because this is new. A lot of these features are new, but I wanted to go ahead and like explain how everything connects. So when you're off on your own, building your own crews, you'll have a good understanding like, okay, cool. Brandon talked about in order to get types on my outputs of a crew, I need to make sure that my final task in a crew has some sort of output type. So in my case, a book outline. And in order to define that, well, I need to go off and make probably the easiest way is to make a type file where I define all my types. That way it's so easy to go ahead and grab those same types that are shared between my crews and my flows. Okay, cool. This is all making sense. Now that we've like done a high level on the generate an outline crew, hopefully it's making sense, passing in topics, generating a ton of chapter outlines. We're now going to hop down into the next crew, which is write a book chapter crew. So let's go ahead and look at this super fast. Let's open up our write book chapter crew, and let's first look at what's going on here at a high level. So once again, we are going to go off and we're going to have multiple agents and tasks inside of our crew. And this one, it's pretty much going to follow the same structure as the last one. First things first, we're going to go off and make sure that our agents have, our crew has a researcher and a writer. Reason why is because if you remember, what we're doing is turning a outline into a chapter. So maybe let's say our description was 200 words of like, hey, right now in AI healthcare, this device is coming out, this device is coming out, and these new models make, cancer detection super, super easy. Okay, cool. Those are 5 bullet points of things I need to go off and turn into a full-on chapter. So I'm just expanding upon those identified items in the outline. So I need to go off and research more about those topics so that I can convert those topics into a full-on chapter. So that's why we have a researcher and a writer. Exact same as we did in the other model. All right, cool. So hopefully that's making sense. And I'll show you the config in just a second, but you can see there's a ton of similarities because not only where our agent's going to go ahead and we're going to only have 2 agents, but our tasks are going to follow the same structure to where task 1, research, task 2 is write. But not only do we just want to write, we want to write and return a specific output. In this case, we're writing a chapter that's going to go into our book. So what does the chapter have? It has nothing more than title and content. All right, cool. Hopefully this makes sense. So let's dive in super fast into our config file so you can see exactly the instructions we're giving for our agents and our task. So when it comes to our agents, what we're doing is we're going to be passing in a lot more variables this time. We're going to say, all right, researcher, here's what I'm trying to write about. Here's the specific chapter title I'm trying to write about. Here's the overarching goal of the book. And here's a specific outline for this chapter that you need to go off and write about. All of these are variables that we are passing in when you look right here. Goal, topic, chapter, all of these are the exact same. So hopefully this is making sense. Then when it comes to the actual task for our crew, you can see we're just being very specific about what we want to do. Hey, when you're researching, go off and make sure you include and look up all of this information. And here's some general background information as well. Then when you're going off and writing this book or writing this chapter for this book, once again, here's exactly what you need to know about. And more importantly, here's the outline for the entire book, just so you have some general context of what we're doing in the grand scheme of things. Awesome. Hopefully this makes sense. Definitely feel free to steal these types of instructions as you go off and create your own crews. All right, now that we're finally done talking about this crew, I think we're getting pretty close to the point to where we can go off and run it and see it in action. So let's go ahead and clear this all out. Let's go ahead and open up our terminal so that we can start running this crew. And before we do that real quick, I do just want to mention, in order to run this crew successfully, you need to update your environment variables for this project. So you can see over here in our write a crew, you can see down here we have our environment variables. You need to pass in an OpenAI key and a SERPer key. SERPer is how we're going to go off and search the internet, and OpenAI is we're going to turn all of our research into an actual book. Okay, hopefully this makes sense. Now, what do we need to do next? Two things. We need to first install everything to run our crew. So we can do CrewAI install. This will go off and install all of our dependencies, create our virtual environment. It'll do everything that we need to. Sick. Now, what we can do next is go ahead and kick off this crew. In our case, flow. So CrewAI, flow, kickoff. This will go ahead and run it. Now, I'm going to just quickly talk about what's happening as it's going on. It does take a minute to write this whole book. So obviously pause and come back. But just know the first kickoff always takes the longest because we're organizing all your packages, getting you set up for success in order to go off and run your flow. The second time you run any flow, it's 1,000 times faster. All right, cool. So what you can see is it's going off right now and searching exactly what we told it to. What's happening in AI in 2024. So it's going to go off, and right now we are in the outline a book section. So yeah, book outlining agent. So we're going off and we're researching everything that's happening in AI in September 2024. And it's going to go off and ultimately create that, once again, recap. It's going to go off and find, oh, cool. Now that I've researched the internet, it seems like there's like 8 chapters that we could really cover in this book. And I'm going to return a list of book outline chapters. So it's going to go off and say, hey, chapter 1 is going to be called Chapter 1 Intro to AI 2024. And we're briefly going to talk about these 10 topics throughout the rest of the book. Then from there, it's going to go off and generate chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so forth and so forth in the outline. Then once it's done, we're going to hop over to the next stage, which is going to be go off and not only are we going to start turning these outlines into actual chapters is pretty much what we're going to do. And once we're finally done, we're going to merge everything together. So I know this is a mouthful. There's a lot going on. Thank you guys so much for sticking with it so far, but I'm going to go ahead and pause because it's going to take usually about, I've noticed about like 4 minutes to write a whole book, which is honestly wild in the grand scheme of things, but I will go ahead and resume the second this flow is done running. All right, guys, so literally 20 seconds after I paused, it went ahead and finished writing the whole book. So I just want to show you how cool this is. So if you open up your file explorer, once it's done running, you'll notice that you now have a new file. So in our case, it is the current state of AI in September 2024. So if I open this up, it is a full-blown book about everything that is happening as of September 2024. So all this data is scraped from the internet and put in a well-formatted book just like this. And if you have some specific tools, so I have like a markdown preview, I can actually see a nice representation of this book. So you can see like, hey, here's the introduction of like, I provided no additional input. This is just the AI doing its thing, which is so cool. But you can say like, hey, here's what's going on as of September 24. You know, here's some of the key areas that it is talking about. And then what it's going to do is just start diving through some of the major trends that are happening inside of basically AI. So all around, this is like, yeah, so you can kind of see like, all right, here's what's happening in AI investment and regulatory. Keep scrolling down, you can kind of see like, all right, here's what's happening with machine learning. Keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And we're going to keep talking about more and more different things that are going on inside of the world of AI as of September 2024. So this is a full-on book. This is so freaking cool, guys. So I do want to show, I went ahead and threw this over into a word counter. And this book happened to be around 13,000 words, which is way above any context window that you could get if you were just to say, you know, normal CrewAI, go write a book. Normally you're capped at like 3,000 max. So we went ahead and combined all these together to make a 13,000 word book, which is wild. And we could do much more depending on the topic that you get. That's a little bit more, not as new, where there's, more information. You could get 20, 30, like I've seen way more than that. So all around, this is awesome. So I just want to show you guys, this is cool. Now, before we go, I do just want to mention a cool few world applications of this. Shout out to Richard in my AI Developer Accelerator community. Few things that you could do with this is actually, for example, Richard, is to generate custom AI lead magnets for your viewers. So for example, if a viewer was to fill out a form for wanting to work with one of your services or whatsoever, you could actually kick off a flow like this to write them a short book. So if you were in the, let's say, fitness space, it could be a workout. If you were in the coding space, you could write out a custom coding plan for how they could go from their current state to a full stack developer. Like, you could basically use this exact flow to go off and provide a more detailed case study, example, guide for your users, and instantly. This took under 2 minutes to generate. So imagine getting a custom 12K, 20K, lead magnet to your viewers that is specific to where they're at in their journey and where they want to go. And you could just generate it on the fly with flows just like this. So all around, this is such a cool tool, guys. I hope you guys are stoked to use it, because I've been blown away with seeing flows in action. And this is just scratching the surface. I cannot express how many more use cases there are with flows, and I have a bunch more coming for you guys with more examples, real world examples, as time goes on. So thank you guys. And that's a wrap for this video, guys. I can't wait to see what you guys go off and create now that you're experts at building flows. And just as a few quick reminders, all the source code in this video is completely for free. Just click that link down in the description below. And if you'd like some additional support and to meet fellow AI developers, I've launched that Skool Community with over 3,000 different AI developers of all skill levels. We'd love to have you a part of the group. And then finally, I did just launch a Fullstack AI Marketing course. So if you're interested in taking what you've learned today and actually going off and building real world AI applications, you're definitely going to love checking out that course. We have over 200 people taking it already, and they're absolutely loving it. I have a link down in the description below as well, and there's some free courses in there inside as well, so you can get a taste of the course before you go off and fully try it out. So let me know if you have any questions, and I cannot wait to see you guys in the next video. See ya.